So, I was gonna record this last night as soon as I had my first coherent thought on this while I was in the shower, but I thought I should just probably sleep on it a bit more, and now I am awake. PlayStation decided to kill physical media, and even though I'm working on this other video that was supposed to come out instead of this one, I have to talk about this because this is a lot bigger than most of us realize. So what did PlayStation actually say? So they made a blog post announcing that they will be stopping the production of physical discs beginning January 2028 for new games releasing on PlayStation consoles. They claim that this was in response to shifting trends in consumer preference, and moving forward, games will only be released on PlayStation Store and at retailers in digital formats only. One interesting thing to note is that they claim that consumer preferences and the broader entertainment industry continue to shift away from physical discs to digital. In my opinion, that's just not the case. Yes, the entertainment industry does, but consumer preferences, it's just not that accessible enough and widely out there for me to safely say that this is because of consumer preference and not because of, just market factors. They did claim, however, that this transition would enable them to align more closely with how most of the community prefers to access and play games today, which I think is true, since most people would gravitate towards the smoothest, most frictionless experience that they can get, which is just click a few buttons and it's going to start to download, versus you actually going out and buying physical media or buying them online and then waiting for the disc to come through the mail. But they said that they'll continue to prioritize their resources to drive innovation in how players can access games and provide choices to where players prefer to purchase new games, whether that's at retailers or PlayStation Store, and they remain committed to delivering a world-class experience to their fans and thank them for their continued support. Adding insult to injury, however, in a throwaway line at the end of this post, they also announced that support for PS3 and PS Vita in the PlayStation Store will stop, and also they gave you a preview of this when they just removed a bunch of movies in the PlayStation Store. So if you bought those movies before in that shop, they just removed those without giving any kind of refund whatsoever. That's going to be the future of digital games in PlayStation right now. What does this mean for you? Well, if you're a PlayStation guy, you'll never be able to own your games anymore, at least in PlayStation. Buying games digitally can be convenient, but years down the line when you're just itching to relive those memories, if it's there, great, but if that online store decides that that game should no longer be there due to whatever reason, tough luck, you're gonna have to go look for it elsewhere. So whether you were okay with just digital releases, no more physical discs right now, or you weren't and you hate this thing, you simply won't have the option anymore. At least PlayStation took that away from you. If you're an Xbox guy, they've also announced that they're phasing out discs soon, and the next Xbox will not even have optical drives. Nintendo might follow suit too, since I think they were the first ones to start just giving out keys and download instructions in their cartridges, so the cartridges don't actually have games in them, but some of the cartridges do have games for the Switch. Nintendo might just not do that anymore. So if you wanted to own your copy of a game, at least legally, looks like the only place to do it is in PC via GOG, if those games are even in there in the first place. Now, it's a good thing that I actually took the time to sleep on this and really get my thoughts together, because I was initially thinking, you know what, I'll play devil's advocate. Maybe digital only is a good thing. I was going to make a point about how maybe games are getting too big to put on discs, and that it's super impractical and super wasteful, because at the end of the day, these are just plastic that's going to rot in some landfill one day. So that whole production model might just be too costly and too wasteful. Or the fact that version 1.0 day one releases, especially on most AAA games, suck ass anyways, and they're gonna patch it immediately anyways to fix all the problems in that first version. So in that sense, games in the physical discs are kinda useless, and they don't really have any real intrinsic value in and of themselves, especially when you put the CD in and it's a broken game that won't work no matter what you do unless you patch it. But then I thought, that's not really the point, is it? The point is that now it's officially an imbalance in the exchange of goods social contract, where the people selling you the good, and I'm using this term loosely, will get the full value of your money, and they can do with it whatever it is that they want to do, whether that's growing their company or buying new mega yachts, which I think we've all decided that it's only cool if Gabe does it. Those companies, they get to keep our hard-earned money forever and ever in perpetuity and do whatever they want, and we can't exactly get it back. Meanwhile, if they decide to pull out the games we exchange our money for from their stores and leave us with no means to access the thing or refund it from us, the game that we bought, well, that's the real issue here. So if you prefer to just go digital, that's fine. I'm mostly a PC gamer, so I know Steam likely won't screw me over. Like, they had to pull out Spec Ops: The Line due to licensing stuff, so you can't buy it in the store. But I still have it in my library, and since I paid for it, I can access it whenever I want, at least for now. That said, for me personally, when I agreed to make my Steam account, I accepted the fact that this will be more of a rented situation where, yeah, it is a service, and realistically, these things won't be internet forever and ever all the time. Like, just take out the internet, you won't have access to it. But let's say I really like a game out of the hundreds in my Steam library by now. I should be able to have the means to access it anytime unless I decide to otherwise. Like, if I wanted to sell my original Pokemon Yellow version Game Boy Color cartridge to some rando on the internet or wherever, or pass it over to my kids one day, I should be able to do that. That's what we mean when we say ownership. But I also treat digital releases of game the same way that I treat my digital purchases of books on Kindle, which Amazon also can just pull out when they want to. You know, there's a difference between I just want to read a book now and have access to it as easily, as cheaply, and as frictionless as I could, versus I want to have this book on my shelf in my private collection because I love this so much that it means so much to me, and I prefer to have this thing besides me. Like, it doesn't have to be a battle between digital versus physical media. Like, you can have both. The problem is, what PlayStation is opening the doors of, the Pandora's box if you will, is that companies will now have all the reason to just not give you the option to own your physical media anymore. And I personally would rather have this dual option where you get to rent your games, your shows, your movies, your music, but you also get to decide that if these things mean enough for you, you would actually be able to keep physical copies of these things that you care about. But now we simply don't get to have that option anymore, outside of maybe one absolute GOAT, which is GOG. The good news is that most PS games will be on there regardless, and on Steam, since most developers tend to release on most platforms anyways. But the bad news is that PS exclusives, as well as Xbox who their exclusives, they're not going to be on GOG at least until they decide to release it there, and you can actually save a copy of your digital purchase. So all in all, not really a good thing for any of us, because at any point these companies can just decide, you know what, you guys aren't going to have access to your games anymore, go fuck yourselves. But what do I actually think is going to happen given all of this? I think for us right now, we'll likely be mad and we'll voice this out, but eventually we're just gonna end up buying what they're selling in the way that they want them to. That is, unless we and by we, you know, I was watching this video by Asmongold saying that if we decided to, we can just say no and then the government can step in, whichever government that is, and then just give us a bit more consumer protection. I think that could be a way to go, but likely that's not really gonna happen. We're gonna likely be mad, and then we're eventually gonna buy this thing. Even the people saying that they're not gonna, you know they're gonna. And companies right now, they're not gonna care and they will push through. They're gonna take off time from social media, and I'm seeing tweets of people saying PlayStation already did that, and they'll all get their sales and bonuses. They'll hit their targets, and for a while things will be fine. In the future, however, the market will always find a way. And this is primarily why I wanted to make the video. I didn't just want to do a recap and just cash in on views or whatever. I genuinely think that it is a bit of a bright future for gaming if they will really push for this to happen, because for us in the future, piracy is just going to come back stronger than ever. Now before you go raise your Jolly Rogers, hear me out. Games will be sold digitally, so our motivation to participate in this won't really come from having better access or like easier access, although most of the third world with lower incomes, I mean, that's just where they're gonna come from. They're gonna do this thing. I know. In fact, I'm gonna pull up Gabe again and paraphrase on what he said before, where piracy isn't really a money issue, it's an access issue. And I think that's true more than ever. People are going to be pirating games, and their motivation will be not because it's easier to access, but it will be for games preservation, so they'll have a copy of that game with them regardless of whether or not their internet goes down, if there's a zombie apocalypse that comes through, PlayStation goes under. There will always be a copy of that game waiting for them regardless of what happens. And yes, PlayStation and Xbox and all these companies will find new ways to add DRM, and someone somewhere will always have a brain that will itch to solve those puzzles and break those locks. And we're gonna have games. It's as simple as that. We might not have them on release day, but we're gonna have them eventually, and we're the ones who's gonna be happy. The piracy experience itself would also likely have a significant upgrade, since they'll have to make the user experience better for the big influx of people who just want to play games and keep their games. So these piracy sites right now that they're few, they're constantly being shut down, they probably won't be as filled with pop-ups and ads and be inconvenient to download from as they are now. At least I've been told by a close friend. Like, that experience has to change, because if all the piracy sites are a pain in the ass to deal with equally, and then a new site comes up and it's so much more easier to access the games from there, guess where all the people are going to be coming to? It's just basic market rules, supply and demand. So we on the consumer side will be having those games regardless, initially to archive, and then the more people will hear about it, the more that piracy service is going to grow and become better. That's just going to grow because we are humans and we like to own stuff, i.e. keep it with you. Nobody's ever agreed to rent cars. That's why people still own cars and own property. Nobody rents forever, at least if they had a choice. Now, companies in the future, on the other hand, yeah, like I said, you're going to have your quick wins and you're not going to go under. But you're probably not going to grow as much or as big as you'd want to, because you'll be limiting yourselves with mostly just the early sales. You won't end up selling to someone who'll buy a PS69 a few years down the line after the initial release, since they'll have the option to pay for the digital access to the game from your system. Access, by the way, I think we should start using digital access and not digital copy, since digital copy implies ownership. Anyways, back on topic. Those new owners of post-release PlayStations and consoles and Xboxes and Z-Boxes, if they make them, they can pay for the digital access to the games, or they can pirate the games. And since there's going to be a demand for physical games and whatever, people are going to figure out how to jailbreak your consoles too. So the only games that they'll likely pay are the new games, because at that point, they'll likely have lots of pirated options out there, and they can get them for free. And once they get them, they're going to get them forever. And while that probably won't be a significant hit to your financials, it's going to be enough of a dent, and it's going to keep messing you up every time you see those numbers. Especially when you consider that even though you may change your product and how you sell it, you're not going to change consumer behaviors and habits as easily or even remotely, because that's human nature, and you can't really change human nature. Yes, we have agency, we have choice, but we also have preferences, and those preferences are universal. When given the option to own, we're gonna own. And as soon as some company figures out this gap in the market, someone with an entrepreneurial spirit can just decide to offer those products and or services to the market, i.e. physical media, and they'll be the ones to make the money and you won't. Xbox is already exploring the idea of disc to digital, where you can convert your physical discs to digital, so you can play your older games in the newer Xboxes, even though I think the right move should be the opposite, where if you bought digital first, you get to have your physical discs eventually, whether or not that's free, or you get to request physical copies of it and pay for it. And I think most people would be okay to buy this, since, let's face it, as much noise as we're making right now, physical media owners, it's a much smaller niche than the larger market. Which is why PlayStation and Xbox and all these companies had this idea. And conspiracy moment, I think GTA 6 pre-sales were the signal that they used to confirm that suspicion. The fact that people pre-ordered digital, discounting the fact that this is one of the most anticipated games of all time that people care about, which is not going to be the same reception as some random game that they're going to be releasing. It's going to be 99% of their catalog. Regardless, physical media owners is a much smaller niche than the larger market, but I think that's only because most of the market does not yet realize the need for physical media or see the value of it until they do. I'm a millennial, I'm gonna die soon, but a larger part of the world are either Gen Z or Gen Alpha. And it's interesting for me to read about their experiences and seeing that when they discovered MP3 players, the fact that you could download songs that you bought, of course, and put them in a device and listen to them offline whenever you want and make playlists without needing internet or Spotify. The fact that that experience was so new to them and they just gravitated towards that immediately tells me two things. Again, number one, we like to own our shit, and number two, they've never experienced it before, but when they did, they loved it so much that that's where the market is shifting, which is why, going back to the blog, this exact quote from the blog says that this is a natural direction for Sony Interactive Entertainment to adapt to consumer trends as the general preference for digital media significantly outpaces physical discs. When in reality, we're seeing that in music, that's not the case. We're seeing in older games, that's not the case. We're seeing a boom in retro handhelds, partly because gaming handhelds have always been cool, and these companies unilaterally, kind of like what they're doing right now with physical media, these companies unilaterally decided to stop making handhelds. Yes, I know, the Switch is a handheld, but it's also not. It's not the same thing as a 3DS or a 2DS before it, or the Game Boy Advance before it, and all the Game Boys before that. Those are fundamentally different games, built for a different experience, and handhelds are great. What's also great is the fact that you can have a game, a copy of a game, you can just boot it and play it, and store it, and get back to it whenever you want. And that's what these companies don't understand, because that's how out of touch they are with their customers and their audience. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, because they haven't experienced the privilege of being able to own your physical media. They were born into a world that didn't actually allow that. Everything was streaming. So theoretically, Xbox can just step in to sell discs again and PlayStation would get fucked. Or even Steam or GOG, since we live in a world of print on demand anyways, whether that's t-shirts or coffee mugs or custom 3D printed anything like the sponsor of this video. No, I'm not sponsored by PCBWay, but look them up to see what's actually possible in the print on demand space. I imagine the same thing can be done and automated a lot better with Blu-ray discs for physical media. Kind of like I think how Netflix used to do it, because I can't imagine that Netflix is gonna house like hundreds of thousands of copies of the same disc when they can just burn something for a few minutes and then like just custom make that. But these companies just don't want to do it because they don't want to provide that service. And as much as they like to worship and emulate Apple and its marketing and the brilliance of Steve Jobs, this was what Steve Jobs meant when he said the consumer doesn't know what they want until you give it to them. Because most of us aren't thinking about this shit constantly. So until someone actually gives us the service where you can get discs of the games that you bought digitally, the first company who figures that out is gonna make so much back. And I hope Valve, if you're listening, I hope you guys do it first. Especially given the fact that there's really only a few exclusives on Xbox or PS. Since like I said before, most of the games are cross-platform or released on multiple platforms anyways, even on Android and iOS in some cases. And on PC, the exclusives are largely indie games or strategy games, sims, and MMOs that you absolutely just cannot play on a console with a controller because you need a keyboard and mouse. If all platforms are offering the same games, most people will just gravitate towards the best service. And sometimes the one thing that will tip the consumer decision of buying from company A instead of company B is if they had the option to keep a physical copy of their game versus if they didn't. Sometimes that's all the difference they need to make. And now the company that offers that service is gonna have all your sales and you won't. And that's gonna be this video. Look, I know times aren't looking that good, but if you've somehow enjoyed this video, do check out my other stuff in my channel. I make commentaries and video essays on this channel now. And if you'd like to sub, consider turning on the bell notification so you'll know every time I upload. Anyways, I just want to talk about it real quick. I'm working on this other thing on Project Hail Mary, and basically how that movie put Netflix and all the other modern movies to shame. That's gonna come out soon. Anyways, I'm Inigo. Thanks for watching. Signing off for now. Bye.